Hello Spartans and welcome to another episode of Coaching Minutes. You have most likely watched my previous video on the life of a threat research/reverse engineer, and you are probably wondering, how about a day in the life of a SOC analyst? I am glad you asked, but before I answer, I need to give you more context, as a day in the life of a SOC analyst will depend on the type of SOC you will join. In this video, I will discuss the types of SOCs that exist, and this will set the stage for my upcoming video on the life of a SOC analyst. I will also answer the question, which SOC type is the right one for me? So let's begin, Spartans. In your travels, you will come across three types of SOCs: MSSP SOC, internal SOC, and hybrid SOC. A managed security services provider, or MSSP, is a company that offers security services to other companies, including security operations. Think of an MSSP as a consulting company that acts as a jack of all trades in the realm of cybersecurity. An internal SOC, as the name implies, is a team that is hired and managed by a company, as opposed to being outsourced to another company such as an MSSP. Finally, a hybrid SOC leverages the advantages of an internal SOC and an MSSP SOC. But you may be asking at this point, why so many flavors of security operations centers? MSSP SOCs have several advantages. The first one is that they tend to have the most skilled analysts. And I know this may come across as a really controversial opinion, but just think about it for a second. These are companies that are dedicated to build security operations teams. At the same time, MSSPs tend to have a lot of customers, and there is a higher likelihood that they are going to investigate high-profile breaches. And this is something that attracts people that are highly passionate about cybersecurity and want to be at the forefront of action. And if there is something that I have learned over the years, is that people that are driven by passion tend to beat everyone else. The second reason is that MSSP SOCs can be much cheaper to build and maintain when compared to an internal SOC. The third advantage is that MSSPs tend to have 24/7 coverage, which can be nearly impossible or prohibitively expensive with a smaller internal SOC. If an internal SOC chooses to implement the 24/7 model, they have several options. The first one is having security operations analysts on call to respond to the most critical alerts, according to some prioritization model designed by the company. This is a 24/7 coverage model. The second option is dividing the security operations team and having some people working days and some people working nights, and then shuffling them around. The final option is having the security operations team spread across several countries and time zones so that the 24/7 model can be implemented without forcing people to work nights. Because as you can imagine, working nights can be quite taxing on your mental health. The fourth advantage of hiring an MSSP is that MSSPs can easily scale their teams and allocate more people to support the company's needs. And this is particularly beneficial for companies that are growing, such as startups. Finally, and probably the most important, MSSPs tend to have teams of experts in every area of cybersecurity. If an MSSP SOC detects that there is a malware infection in a customer's environment, they can engage the internal reverse engineering team to analyze the sample and report back indicators of compromise and the modus operandi of the malware. Because hiring one or more reverse engineers for an internal security operations team is not only crazy, but also really expensive. By all accounts, MSSPs seem like a dream, and it makes little sense to have an internal SOC. But I can assure you that MSSPs fall short in some aspects where internal SOCs excel. The first problem with MSSPs is that they are like a hammer and they see every problem as a nail. They have little to no understanding of the intricacies of each customer, which affects their ability to respond effectively and efficiently. And because I have experience working in MSSP SOCs, I will give you a list of situations when this happens. For instance, an MSSP SOC may not be aware that some devices or subnets are actually used for security testing, and they may spam the customer with reports that are actually false positives, or true positives that require no action. The second problem is that MSSPs may miss attacks that target some idiosyncratic behavior that is only displayed within a specific customer's application. And when I mean behavior, it can be anything ranging from application logic to a specific vulnerability. And the reason for this is quite simple. MSSPs tend to employ detection rules that are quite general and tend to cover most customers' needs. Which leads us to the third problem. MSSPs may have specific detections for well-known attacks such as SQL injections, but they may not have detections for specific types of activity that are considered policy violations, such as unauthorized usage of certain operating systems or even personal devices. Another point where MSSP SOCs fall short when compared to internal SOCs is that they tend to rely on endpoint agents to pull forensics data or even run playbooks and incident response commands. While these endpoint agents and playbooks tend to be quite versatile and effective, they cannot beat the versatility of having access to the real infrastructure. Internal security operations teams can work together with DevOps teams and cloud security teams to respond to incidents much faster when compared to an MSSP, which relies on endpoint agents or perhaps playbooks that have limited privileges over the infrastructure. Another advantage of internal SOCs over MSSPs is that they have more flexibility to manage alerts and time. Don't forget that MSSPs have to show value to the customers, and it's not uncommon for MSSP analysts to report the same activity over and over again, to show the customers that they are paying attention and that their price tag is worth it. This can end up being a burden for customers because they are going to be bombarded with a bunch of reports which are a mix of true and false positives. And to add to that problem, because MSSPs receive so many alerts and the chances of alert fatigue are quite high for analysts, it may be the case that MSSP analysts may report an activity as a false positive when in fact that activity represented the beginning of a breach. Internal SOCs, on the other hand, don't suffer from most of these problems. And the reason is because internal SOCs only report to the company and not to a bunch of customers. For that reason, they are not required to write reports for every activity that they investigate, meaning that they can close alerts much faster. And at the same time, they are not forced to spend the entire day closing alerts. They can choose to investigate and close the ones that have the highest priority, because they don't have to show value to customers. This is a massive advantage for security analysts and even the company itself, because the analysts can allocate time to more critical tasks, such as developing new rules or tools. The fourth shortcoming of MSSPs, and I've mentioned this before, is that MSSPs have detections that apply to all customers, and false positives are more the rule than the exception. Internal SOCs can tune some, if not most of their rules, based on the knowledge that they have of the company, such as devices, services, roles, etc. Keeping track of all of these exceptions from an MSSP perspective is an absolute nightmare that I can attest to, as it is simply not scalable. Finally, for analysts, internal SOCs are much more relaxed when compared to MSSP SOCs, and they can also be much more interesting and a place where you can learn much more. The reason for this is that the volume of alerts is usually much smaller and there is much less bureaucracy in the way, in the sense that you don't have to create a report or even a ticket for every activity that you investigate. At the same time, with startups or smaller companies, the SOC can have more capabilities that extend beyond investigating alerts. It can actually manage the security appliances and even develop much more advanced automation. And the reason for this is that smaller companies mean less red tape. Such freedom will make you a much more well-rounded professional when compared to a monkey closing alerts regularly. Finally, hybrid SOCs are the best of both worlds and are useful when a company wants to have a company-aware SOC and with 24/7 coverage. And now comes the time for which you all have been waiting. It is time to answer the question, which SOC type is the right one for me? Usually the answer is it depends. But in this case, I will choose the highly opinionated route and say that you should start your career with an MSSP SOC. And there are a few reasons for this. The first reason is that MSSP SOCs are quite stressful and draining. And at the beginning of your career, you are much more energized and motivated. This will help you handle the mix of stress and monotony of MSSP SOCs without breaking. Moreover, this will build your mental resilience and will prepare you for the rest of your career as a cybersecurity professional. Also, at the beginning of your career, you should aim for hard skills and as much technical experience and exposure as you can possibly muster. The reason for this is that you will build a solid technical foundation, which will then help you move to more specific areas such as threat research, cloud security, etc. Finally, MSSP SOCs have several capabilities, sub-teams, and tech that are already in place and at a higher level of maturity when compared to internal SOCs. The advantage of this is that you can focus on learning proper threat research, threat hunting, and others from people with experience, using cutting-edge tech and with a solid budget behind all of this. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, MSSP SOCs are quite harsh. They are sweatshops where the burnout rate is high and people usually don't last long before they move on to other positions and companies. However, they are the type of place where you should really consider starting your career because, and assuming that you are part of a large and well-known MSSP, you will develop a degree of skill and pain tolerance that will make anything after easy, except reverse engineering. Later in your career, you can choose to transition into an internal SOC and acquire a different set of skills, such as building tooling and automation, developing MSSP-grade capabilities, such as threat hunting, and exploring more tech beyond your everyday SIEM. Now, a disclaimer is in order. Internal SOCs are not laid back and relaxed. They are highly stressful because many capabilities, such as threat hunting, threat research, and automation, are underdeveloped or non-existent, and the budget is usually smaller when compared to MSSPs. This means that you are going to have smaller teams, less people to support you, and probably cheaper tech. The upside of this is that internal SOCs are going to make you much more resourceful and ready to deliver the same amount of work when compared to an MSSP with less resources. At the same time, depending on the SOC's influence, you may have to decide and enforce strict controls, which can annoy people and lead to pushbacks. MSSP SOCs don't usually have to deal with these, as they are, for the most part, customer agnostic. All they do is monitor a company's infrastructure and respond to incidents as much as their remote tooling and access allows. Customers are, for the most part, black boxes for them. And we reach the end, Spartans. Describing the day-to-day of a security operations analyst only makes sense once you understand the internals of a SOC, which depend on the type. MSSP, internal, and hybrid SOCs have advantages and disadvantages, as I described in this video. Deciding which type is best for you is, for the most part, a matter of taste, as all the types have their pros and cons. In general, I advise people to go hard at the beginning of their careers and push the limits of their knowledge and mental resilience, so they can take their foot off the gas later as they get older, less energetic, but knowing that their CV and skills are close to future-proof. Are you currently a SOC analyst? Which type of SOC do you work for? And which one do you prefer? Let me know in the comment section below. Until next time, stay safe, stay paranoid.